Hello, and welcome to the Legacy Crusaders YouTube channel. This is Benji, and I try to help you misplay less and win more. Today, we're going to cover 5 tips regarding the Kashtira deck, which appears to be the new best deck. Without playing cards to beat this deck, it should more or less win automatically going first. We'll start off talking about ways to beat the deck and how the deck can also protect itself from being beaten. And our first tips are methods for dealing with the completed board, which is usually Diablosis, Shangri-La with 3 zones locked, Erase Heart, and a Fenrir. Given enough extenders, it'll actually be able to make 2 Shangri-La and block 5 zones on turn 1, which is super overpowered if your opponent knows what you're playing. You may have to play varied forms of ways to beat the board, so locking all 5 of either zone doesn't instantly win the game. The first option to beat this, assuming you have any zones to activate it, is the Quick Play spell card Book of Eclipse, which can be used to flip Erase Heart and Shangri-La face down, so that Erase Heart will stop applying its Macrocosmos-like effect, and Shangri-La will no longer be locking zones, as its lingering effect requires the card to be face up to do so. The biggest problem with this card, of course, is that it can be negated by Ash Blossom, as it includes an effect that draws cards at the end of the turn. They are also actively testing things like Forbidden Lance to protect particular monsters from spell cards. This way you can't use your Dark Rulers, Dark Holes, or other spells and traps to out the board. If you're concerned with your opponent playing Forbidden Lance, you can try things like Nibiru, as the deck generally plays into Nibiru, but it does have variations of a combo where it only summons exactly 4 times and ends on just an Erase Heart with 3 materials. One of the ways they play around you Nibiruing them so they can do their full board is the deck does not require its normal summon, so it might play Nightmare Corruptor Ibli and use that as a normal summon after it's performed its first special summon, and then it can link it into a Lingirabo and give you Ibli so that you cannot activate Nibiru. And because you control Ibli, you cannot special summon monsters other than Link monsters, so you will not be allowed to activate Nibiru. You could also try playing Lingirabo yourself as a side deck card against your opponent's Ibli, or use Ibli yourself against opponents who play Kashtira in the event that they don't play Ibli or Lingirabo when you're going first, as they may not have a way to out it so that they can special summon any of their monsters. Giving them a monster is a good way to stop them from playing. Also note that any important card you play in your extra deck for the Kashtira matchup needs to be run as a duplicate, because Kashtira plays both Unicorn and Diablosis the Mind Hacker, which both have the ability to remove cards from the extra deck. If you need more ways to access your outs, you can play Triple Tactics Thrust. If you activate any card and it would be banished, it'll trigger the mandatory effect of Erase Heart, turning on the activation condition for Triple Tactics Thrust, allowing you to activate it and search for any spell or trap card, including Triple Tactics Talents, which will also be live because Erase Heart will activate during the main phase when any card is banished, which turns on Talents because you'll activate Thrust during the main phase, meaning you'll have Talents live in the main phase where you can try and take your opponent, XYZ monster, attack into them, and attempt to make a Zeus, although they could, assuming they only ended on the Erase Heart. They can just use Erase Heart's effect to banish itself so that your Talents doesn't take their card. That's another place where they can actually use their Forbidden Lance to prevent you from taking their card with Triple Tactics Talents. But Zeus is a big card that they go for in your extra deck, or try to avoid, so that's something to be aware of. Also worth knowing, if you take control of a Kashtira monster, and either player has activated Shangri-La that turn, you can make your own Erase Heart over any Kashtira monster. The second thing to know is that the third effective of Diablosis, the Mind Hacker, the one that banishes cards from the top of the deck, cannot be activated if you have less cards in your deck than you would need to banish, so this card cannot deck you out by itself. If you weren't familiar with how the Kashtira main deck monsters trigger effects work, they can be activated on attack declaration, meaning prior to a replay. So when the attack is initially declared, they have to declare the effect of the Kashtira monster and activate their effect. If its effect is activating because your opponent activated a monster effect, that is a trigger condition. So as trigger effects work, they will activate in a new chain, not in response to the card that was activated. So if the card they activate would destroy your Kashtira monster, your monster will not be alive to activate its effect during the next available chain. But I see a lot of duelists constantly assuming that these cards are chained to the monster that has activated its effect, which is false. Both Tearlament's Kashtira and Scareclaw Kashtira have an effect to summon themselves. For their activated effect that says you can special summon this card, then banish a Scareclaw or Kashtira or Tearlament's card from your hand or graveyard. So imagine that you have both of these and exactly one card you can banish to summon them. You can chain both of them in response to one another, because they're both quick effects that can be used during the main phase, and because of their conjunction, which is the, and if you do conjunction, you do not need to be able to resolve the second part to resolve the first part, but you need to be able to do both in order to activate them legally. So they will be special summons, and then if one of them banishes the only target, the other one will be unable to do so, but that does not mean activating to summon them was illegal. Also, I have an interesting short regarding Scareclaw Kashtira attacking in defense position I'd look at if you want to see another interesting Yugioh ruling. There's also a couple of things to know about the spell cards of the deck. Kashtira Birth's effect to allow you to perform a normal summon of a level 7 monsters without tribute. On the English text of the card does not specify it only applies to one normal summon. That may be possible potentially. You might want to ask a judge on this one if you can perform multiple normal summons of level 7 monsters, assuming you played cards to have an extra normal summon. Based on the text of the English card it sounds like you can. On the OCG text, it does not sound like you can. Birth is really good versus the Runic deck because depending on whose turn it is. Both of them have a trigger effect for Kashtira Birth and Runic Fountain, and if you can banish all 3 target spell cards for Runic Fountain with the Kashtira Birth, they'll be unable to shuffle them back and draw cards. Kashtira Theosis targets a monster and summons a monster whose attribute is different from the monster that you targeted. So if the monster that was targeted would leave the field or be flipped face down, it'll be unable to summon a monster because it will not be able to check what the monster's attribute is. And that's everything for this 5 tips video. If you have any other things you'd like to see tips about, please leave them in the comments. Otherwise, please check out this video on missing the timing.